Good morning, I'm WaywornWyrm, and welcome to my channel, and welcome to episode 1 of Curse the Darkness, The Wedding. Amoff leaned against the side of the witch's cellar, quietly watching the scene in front of him. Two processions slowly walked toward each other from opposite sides of town, heading for the town square. In the procession of women, one of the women was giving flowers to all of the others for good luck. And in the procession of men, one man was giving pennies to each other man in order to please Karsk. He hated weddings, especially rural weddings. The problem with rural weddings was there was no way to avoid the wedding if you were in the area. The inn was the only open place in town today. Well, the inn and the Temple of Sabrin, of course. The wedding party would soon enter the Temple of Sabrin and hold the ceremony, and then maybe some local customs, but at some point in the not-too-distant future, the entire town would end up at the witch's cellar and would not leave all night. And of course, he was staying at the witch's cellar. Scanning the crowd briefly, Amoff tried to spot his companions. He knew that Rado would probably be in their room working on some concoction or another. He spotted Rosamunde right where he expected to find her, near the temple watching the processions. Tostig was also quite easy to spot. The tall, tanned man in leather armor with a shield on his back and a sword at his belt stood out in almost any crowd, especially since he didn't have a scabbard for that sword. Wilhelm was the hardest one to spot. The rat catcher tended to blend in almost everywhere he went, but eventually Amoff spotted him by the edge of the crowd, also watching on. Swanzi was going to be the stopping off point where they rested and if needed resupplied before moving on toward the village of Vorburg and beyond. But a few things changed that. A few weeks back, they were in the town of Steiger on their way here when they ran into a courier who was looking for Amoff. Apparently, Maximilian Steiger, the groom today, was a distant relative of Amoff's. Learning more about him, it turned out that Maximilian lived in Vorburg, and Tostig used to work with Maximilian's head bodyguard. Rosamunde insisted that this was a sign from Sabrin himself, and they must be here for this wedding and be present for whatever was going to happen. So, Amoff found himself leaning against the side of an inn in the last town he was planning on seeing for a while, watching someone so distantly related to him he had never even heard of that branch of the family before now, and who clearly wanted some of Amoff's respectability to rub off on him getting married. A couple hours later, and Amoff was starting to enjoy himself, very much in spite of himself. Turns out, that night the alcohol was free and free-flowing. Even Rado had come down from their room and was starting to enjoy himself, also in spite of everything. Hey, Amoff, I was just told of a wonderful local tradition. The bride's family has pretended to kidnap her, and we have to go find her. Sounds like great fun, doesn't it? Rado asked with a grin. Amoff shook his head. No, it does not. But feel free to join in the tomfoolery. I will stay here with my mead. Rado shrugged. Your loss, he replied as he started to wander off. As that was happening, a man started to saunter over to Amoff. As Amoff watched him approach, it was clear that the man was trying to walk over without looking like he had a purpose. The man walked up and smiled. Hello, I'm Lutz. I couldn't help but hear that you and your companion talk about the kidnapping of the bride. Amoff arched his brow for a second, but decided to let this man give his pitch before shooting him down. I work for Franz Raffke, the father of the bride. he left the rest of what he was getting at hang in the air between them, clearly hoping Amoff would pick up on the idea and say it, so he wouldn't have to. Or better yet, neither of them would say it and just knew what they were talking about. Amoff just kept his gaze on Lutz. "What are you getting at?" He finally leveled at Lutz when it was very clear that he wasn't going to continue without prompting. Lutz sighed. "For a small consideration of coins, I tell you in what general area the bride might be." Amoff nodded at this, not in agreement necessarily, but in acknowledgement of having heard Lutz. "Sure. And how much would this small consideration of coin be?" Lutz squirmed for a minute, clearly both uncomfortable and thinking. "How about 3 silvers? Amoff's face darkened at this immediately. "Get gone, you disgusting leech of a man!" Lutz reacted with shock, but started scurrying away and disappeared back into the crowd. It took some time before Amoff's mood cleared again and he relaxed back into his drink. Sometime a little while after that, Ratto returned and slumped into a chair next to Amoff. "I take it you didn't win," Amoff stated. "No. I got close, but one of the other guys in the hunt, there were only 4 of us, found a small clue I missed, and he entered the correct building just before I did. I was off by a couple of houses until it was too late." Ratto shrugged at this. "Oh well, shit happens." Amoff nodded. "Indeed it does." Just as they were lapsing back into silence, Rosemunde walked up to the table Amoff had been at for hours now. "Well, come on now! Tostig is up to his usual shenanigans, and we should be on hand. Wilhelm is keeping an eye on him for the moment, but we have to hurry." Getting up and starting to follow Rosemunde, Amoff asked, "What did he get himself into now?" Rosemunde sighed heavily, as befit a female follower of Yerzalan. "Apparently, the bride hunt isn't the only backward tradition they have out here. Apparently, there is a foot race between the men." Ratto looked up. "That doesn't seem too odd," he said, cutting her off. He got a stern rebuke for his efforts. "If you would let me continue, apparently this is done with one of the town's maidens on their back. Said maiden holds 3 cabbages that can be used to throw at the other racers. The winning couple are married until the next dawn, and are more than free to act as such, including consummating said marriage if they so choose." It was Amoff's turn to sigh heavily now. Of course, Tostig would find the one socially acceptable way to attempt to bed a woman on this night. Tostig would argue that he was at heart a romantic, in stark opposition to his normal job as a man-at-arms. Or mercenary, really. But plenty of people in Tostig's wake would use the term lecher instead of romantic. As the 3 of them finally reached the area where the foot race was to be held, Tostig was a sight to behold. So was Wilhelm, for that matter. Wilhelm was holding Tostig's shield and sword, his maul strapped to his waist, and Wilhelm's small dog Stein was standing guard over Tostig's armor, which lay in a neat pile on the ground. Tostig was standing at the starting line with 3 other men, with a plump but pretty young maiden on his back. It was clear from his constant small movements that Tostig was drunk, and it was affecting him. Each man had a cup in his hand, and each were drinking. Rada leaned in close to the two. Tostig may be drinking a beer, but the others aren't. Are you sure? Rosamunde asked. Of course I am. One of them just drank an entire cup in one drink like it was nothing. That's not something you do with beer. And notice how Tostig has the largest woman of them all on his back. I think they're trying to stack the deck as much against our friend as possible. Probably, Amoff admitted. And then the race started. It was a circle around the town square, 6 laps. And Tostig took a moment or two to start after everyone else had taken off. It was quite a race, with each of the men throwing their cabbages at each other, causing them to slow down, and several of the townspeople were holding turnips, ready to throw them at any of the racers. But for some reason, they never did. And the entire time, the woman on Tostig's back was berating him at every turn, especially for being drunk and starting late. Tostig started well in the back of the crowd, but began to make up ground. During the end of the 3rd lap, Tostig started gaining ground and hit one of the racers in the face with a cabbage, causing him to swerve into the crowd and tumble, taking him out of the race. During the 4th lap, both of the 2 townsmen that were left started to look tired, and one of them gave up in the 5th lap. The last lap was hardest of all, and it was clear that both the remaining racer and Tostig were beginning to tire, and if the race had gone on for another lap or two, one or both of them would have had to call it quits. In the end, however, Tostig managed to pull quite far ahead of the other racer, who was beginning to stumble and slow down. Tostig finished the last lap almost a quarter of a lap ahead of his competition. The 2 walked over to the group soon afterward, smiling and giggling at each other. It was quite clear what they were both about to do. Boss, Tostig slurred, I will be away for the night. I hope you can hold down the fort without me. And with that, he stumbled off with his new bride, helping to hold him up. Thank you so much for listening to the first episode of Curse the Darkness. Episode 2 of Curse the Darkness, entitled The Rub, will air on Sunday, February 18th. And don't forget to tune in tomorrow for the Friday show.